Once symbols of wealth and power, these mansions now sit empty, slowly being reclaimed by nature. From overgrown gardens to crumbling walls, these abandoned estates tell stories of forgotten fortunes and faded glory. Join me, we're counting down 15 mansions that are totally abandoned. Number 15. The Marian Coffin Garden, part of the Gibraltar Estate in Wilmington, Delaware, traces its origins back to the mid-19th century. The mansion itself was built in the 1840s by John Rodney Brinkle, but it wasn't up until the 20th century that the gardens truly came to life. In the early 1900s, Hugh Rodney Sharp Jr. commissioned Marian Kruger Coffin, one of the first female professional landscape architects in the United States, to design the estate's gardens. Known for her formal yet harmonious designs, Coffin transformed the surrounding land into a series of meticulously planned terraces, flower beds, and water features. By the late 1960s, Hugh Rodney Sharp Jr. had lost interest in maintaining the gardens, and following his death in 1990, the mansion and gardens fell into neglect. The once pristine terraces became choked with ivy and weeds, statues stood obscured by overgrowth, and the reflection pool turned into a stagnant basin. Nature, relentless and indifferent, began reclaiming the estate. Vines crept over stone staircases, tree roots cracked through paved walkways, and seasonal blooms gave way to wild brambles. The estate, once a symbol of refinement, became an eerie tableau of faded grandeur. In the 1990s, preservation organizations recognized the value of the Marian Coffin Garden. Efforts to restore the gardens began, guided by archival photos and Coffin's original plans. Today, the gardens exist in a delicate balance between their storied past and a carefully curated present. The mansion remains shuttered and silent, but the gardens thrive as a living tribute to Marian Coffin's vision. Number 14. Villa Dichi. Villa Dichi, also known as the Ghost Mansion, sits in the forested hills east of Lake Como in northern Italy. Built between 1854 and 1857, the villa was commissioned by Count Felix Dichi, a decorated hero and head of the Italian National Guard following Milan's liberation from Austrian control. The design was entrusted to architect Alessandro Sidoli, who combined Baroque and classical Eastern styles to create a summer residence fit for nobility. Tragedy struck before the villa was even complete, as Sidoli passed a year before construction finished. Despite the setback, though, Count moved in with his family and enjoyed the estate for several years. However, in 1862, disaster struck again. The Count allegedly returned home to find his wife brutally murdered and his daughter missing. His search for her proved fruitless, and consumed by grief, he took his own life later that year. The estate then passed to Count Dichi's brother Biago, who made significant changes to the property, including removing any of its Eastern design elements. The family remained in the villa until World War II, after which it was permanently vacated, and by the 1960s the property had been abandoned entirely. After World War II, the roof collapsed, walls cracked, and frescoes faded under exposure to the elements. While nature played its part in the villa's decline, human interference accelerated it. Vandals broke windows, sprayed graffiti across the once pristine walls, and destroyed furniture, including the famous grand piano. Rumors of occult gatherings and satanic rituals in the 1920s, allegedly involving Aleister Crowley, fueled the villa's dark reputation. Tales of ghostly apparitions, eerie music, and inexplicable lights turned the estate into a magnet for thrill-seekers and urban explorers. Despite these indignities, Villa Dichi has shown surprising resilience. In 2002, an avalanche devastated the surrounding area, destroying neighboring houses. This villa, however, remained untouched, a fact that only deepened its mysterious aura. Number 13. The Kangyan Villa. The Kangyan Villa, located in Armenia, stands as an abandoned relic of a turbulent past. Constructed in 1936 as a summer retreat for Agazi Kangyan, the first secretary of the Communist Party of Armenia, this villa was intended to be a luxurious sanctuary. However, the villa's history is steeped in political intrigue and tragedy. Agazi Kangyan was a rising political figure, known for his reformist ideas and his growing influence. The villa, designed in the early 20th century Armenian modernist style, reflected a blend of sophistication and functionality. Its circular design, a rare architectural choice for the time, offered panoramic views of the surrounding hills. Spacious rooms, wide terraces, and large windows were designed to create a seamless connection. Following Kangyan's passing, the villa's fate became uncertain. It was briefly repurposed for various administrative functions during the Soviet era, but by the late 20th century, it was left abandoned. Moss crept over the stone walls, vines wound through broken windows, and trees pushed their way through the cracked floors. The once grand circular terraces are now overtaken by shrubs. Despite its dilapidated state, though, the villa still carries an air of intrigue. Local legends tell of ghostly figures seen wandering the hallways at dusk. Occasional attempts at restoration have been proposed, but none have been fully realized, and some conservation groups and historians have expressed interest in preserving the villa, but the scale of the damage and the financial investment required poses some significant challenges. Number 12. The Outlaw House. Built in 1914 in rural Mobile County, Alabama, the Outlaw House stood as one of the finest examples of Spanish colonial revival architecture in the region. Designed by renowned architect George Bigelow Rogers, who was also responsible for landmarks such as the Mobile Public Library and the Van Antwerp Building, the house was a rare architectural gem in the Deep South. In 1925, George Outlaw, co-founder of the iconic Morrison's cafeteria chain, acquired the property, and local lore suggests he may have won the house in a high-stakes poker game. Outlaw expanded the estate, creating the 17-acre Outlaw Lake by damming a natural spring. The lake not only provided a serene backdrop, but it also generated electricity for the house through the dam. An underground tunnel reportedly connected the basement to the lake across the street. Outlaw also played a significant role in bringing power to the surrounding homes, solidifying his influence in the community. In 1940, Outlaw and his family moved to the city, leaving this grand home behind. In the 1960s, his son Arthur renovated the property and briefly leased it to the local police chief before taking up residence himself. By the 1980s, the Outlaw House was largely unused, with only sporadic visits from family and friends. Arthur Outlaw's departure marked the beginning of the estate's slow decline, while surrounding land continued to be used for hunting and tree farming. The house itself was left to the elements. Despite its dilapidated state, Outlaw Lake remained a local point of interest, occasionally drawing visitors and family members seeking nostalgia. Yet without consistent maintenance or restoration efforts, the house's fate seemed sealed. In the early hours of July 9, 2021, the Outlaw House was consumed by fire. The cause still remains unknown, but the blaze reduced much of the structure to rubble. Later that year, on December 1, 2021, the remains of the house, along with a neighboring Outlaw family home, were bulldozed. The estate that once symbolized early 20th century luxury and innovation had been erased from the landscape. Number 11. Honos Hall. The Honos estate, located in North Wales, has roots reaching back to the early 16th century, with records suggesting occupation since about 1530. A hall was constructed on the site in 1674, but no traces of this earlier building remain. The present hall was built between 1861 and 1866 for Henry Robertson Sandbach, whose family had acquired the estate in 1830. Designed by Sir George Gilbert Scott, one of the leading architects of Gothic revival, Honos House stands as the only example of this country house style in Wales. Over the years, the estate transitioned from a family home to a school during World War II, then an accountancy college, and finally a care home for the elderly before its closure in 1993. The hall showcases Venetian Gothic design, a style characterized by pointed arches, intricate stonework, and a combination of functionality and grandeur. Scott's vision incorporated tall, narrow windows, ornate tracery, and decorative brickwork, creating a stately appearance while still blending into the surrounding landscape. The hall included an elaborate conservatory designed in 1883 by Scott's son, John Oldred Scott. Inside, the interiors were opulent, with detailed woodwork, grand staircases, and large, airy rooms designed for both entertainment and private family. The grounds of this house are equally notable, featuring terraces, a gorge with a waterfall, and a 4-acre walled garden. Over 1,000 species of native and exotic trees once filled this estate, reflecting the Victorian passion for horticulture and botanical exploration. The decline of the house began in early 20th century when the Sandbach family sold the estate in the 1930s. Its time as a school and later as a care home brought significant structural changes, including the addition of a gymnasium and an elevator. In 2004, though, disaster struck when a fire tore through the hall, reducing much of the building to a shell. Nature began to reclaim the site, and ivy crept over the remaining walls and trees sprouted from the floors that once hosted grand banquets, and wildlife found shelter in the decaying structure. Number 10. Houseon Hall. Houseon Hall was built in 1893 in Millbrook, New York, commissioned by H.J. Davison Jr., a wealthy publisher. It was designed by architect James E. Ware. The Grand Queen Anne-style building originally functioned as a hotel. However, it failed to attract guests and closed shortly after opening. In 1907, the property was purchased by Bennett School for Girls, which would later become Bennett College, a two-year institution focused on liberal arts and vocational studies for women. By the 1970s, it faced some financial instability. Attempts to modernize the campus, including the construction of the costly Kettering Science Center, only deepened its debts. Despite efforts to merge with other institutions, though, Bennett College closed its doors in 1977, leaving Houseon Hall abandoned. Nature began to reclaim the building. Trees grew through gaping holes in floors and ivy crept up the walls. Broken windows became frames for sprawling vines, and wildlife made homes in the abandoned hallways. Urban explorers and photographers were drawn to Houseon Hall, capturing haunting images of decay juxtaposed with remnants of past beauty. A piano gathering dust in a flooded room, sunbeams filtering through shattered stained glass, and peeling wallpaper revealing layers of history. The property did change hands multiple times, eventually falling into the ownership of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation after a bank failure. In 2012, plans were announced to demolish it, but the process was delayed. And finally, in 2021, demolition began. Today, the site's being repurposed as a public park. The legacy of Houseon Hall endures in photographs, memories of former students, and the haunting beauty of its ruins. For decades, it stood as both a symbol of early 20th century ambition and a reminder of the inevitability of decay. Number 9. The Holt House. Hidden among the pathways and animal exhibits of the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington, D.C., lies the Holt House, a crumbling relic from the early 19th century. Built sometime between 1805 and 1810, the house originally served as a summer villa in the wooded hills surrounding Rock Creek. These rural retreats provided wealthy Washingtonians a cool escape from the oppressive heat and unsanitary conditions of the city. For nearly a century, the Smithsonian operated the Holt House as an office building. However, by the 1980s, the house had deteriorated to the point of being unsafe. Severe termite damage had hollowed out its wooden framework, and structural instability became a serious concern. Originally, it was a two-story structure with a balanced facade and large, evenly spaced windows designed to let in natural light, and digital recreations suggest polished white walls and gleaming hardwood floors once defined the interior. The house's decline wasn't immediate, but rather a slow process of neglect and indecision. In the 1980s, the cost of restoration outweighed the building's perceived value. By the early 2000s, the National Trust for Historic Preservation noted that structural collapse was not only possible, but likely. Congressional stipulations specifically barred funding for the Holt House, effectively sealing its fate as an abandoned structure. This bureaucratic deadlock led preservationists to refer to the situation as demolition by neglect. Well, left to the elements, the house slowly became part of the surrounding environment. This slow decay has given the Holt House a haunting beauty, though. While it no longer serves its original purpose, it stands as a reminder of the fragility of historic structures. The mansion is now less a building and more an artifact, a skeletal reminder of a bygone era gradually being pulled back into the earth. Number 8. The James Melon House. Located in the overgrown outskirts of Palatka, Florida, James Melon House stands as a fading relic of wealth and winter retreats. Built in the late 19th century by James Ross Melon, a prominent financier and member of one of America's wealthiest dynasties, the home served as a seasonal refuge for the Melon family. James, son of the banking magnate Thomas Melon, constructed the 6,000-square-foot home as an escape from the harsh Pennsylvania winters for himself and his wife. At the height of its activity, the house was a vibrant social hub. His wife's passing in 1919 marked the beginning of the house's gradual retreat from its former vibrancy, though James continued to visit until his passing in 1934. Following James's death, the property changed hands several times. By the 1970s, it had effectively been abandoned, left to decay under Florida's relentless humidity and encroaching vegetation. Framed artwork and vintage radios sit undisturbed, artifacts of lives long past. The parlor, once a centerpiece of hospitality, now bears peeling plaster and sagging framework. Despite the deterioration, though, the bones of the structure endure, an example of 19th century craftsmanship. A calendar from January 1970 remains pinned to the wall as if time itself had paused. Personal belongings, children's toys, books, and glassware are scattered throughout the home, offering glimpses into the lives that once occupied its rooms. Moving on to number 7, the Tanglin Hostel. The Tanglin Hostel was established in 1958 as a product of Brunei's need to send students abroad for their education. At that time, Brunei's local education system was underdeveloped, and the country was grappling with economic challenges. Singapore, a regional hub for education, became a key destination for these students, many of whom came from Brunei's Islamic stream. Over time, the hostel expanded to accommodate students from English and Malay educational streams as well. This hostel is an example of colonial architecture, with large, airy spaces and distinct features that harken back to mid-20th century designs. High ceilings, long hallways, and large windows let in abundant natural light, while the solid, sturdy materials were designed to withstand the humid climate of Singapore. By the early 1980s, the need for the hostel began to dwindle as Brunei developed its own secondary education system, reducing the number of students sent abroad. As their educational infrastructure improved, the government phased out the need for such arrangements, and by 1983 the hostel closed its doors for good. Though the building remained a private property under the control of the Brunei consulate, it became largely inaccessible to the public. The surrounding area, once home to a thriving student community, now stands silent. Despite the building's abandoned state, though, many who have visited or heard stories about the hostel report a peculiar sense of nostalgia when standing before it. The place seems to hold echoes of the past, of students laughing in the hallways, playing football in the yard, and celebrating Brunei's national events. These accounts hint more at the weight of history and memory than at any supernatural forces. The tangible remains of a bygone era of education, camaraderie, and cultural exchange seem to speak louder than any ghostly presence could. Number 6. The Chateau Miranda. The Chateau Miranda was built in 1866 in Belgium and was a grand residence for the Lydekker-Beaufort family. It was commissioned to replace their former castle, which had been abandoned due to the threat of revolution. The mansion was designed in a neo-Gothic style that would later contribute to its eerie reputation. The Lydekker-Beauforts, aristocrats of French origin, lived in the castle until World War II, when it was then taken over by a Belgian railway company. The estate was then transformed into an orphanage, and it was during this point, particularly because of the somber atmosphere, that it earned the ominous moniker Noisy Castle. In 1980, the orphanage was relocated and the castle saw only light use until it was completely abandoned in 1991. And despite attempts to preserve the structure or repurpose it, the once magnificent estate eventually succumbed to neglect, leading to its demolition in 2017. By the late 1980s, though, the upkeep of Chateau Miranda became too costly. The building was no longer a residence, but a relic, and the orphanage that had once given it a grim reputation moved out in 1980. Vandals taking advantage of the building's derelict state caused further damage. Tiles were stolen and fires were set in multiple places, adding to the sense of destruction. Despite challenges, though, the castle became a popular destination for urban explorers, photographers, and those intrigued by history. Many visitors began to report strange feelings or eerie experiences, with rumors of hauntings circulating, possibly due to the castle's grim past as an orphanage. Demolition began in 2016, and by 2017, the castle that had once housed French aristocrats and later traumatized children was gone, reduced to rubble. The crumbling estate had become a symbol of the passage of time, with its Gothic spires now just a memory, and the haunting images of the castle, once filled with life, now stand as a reminder of human fragility and the inevitability of decay. Number 5. Durham House. The Durham House, located on the Isle of Wight, has a long history that stretches back to the early Norman period. The site was originally home to a Norman priory around 1100, which was later transformed into a Tudor house. In 1701, the Worsley family began construction on a new manor house at the location, which was completed in 1772. After the Worsley family left in the mid-1800s, the manor was used for various purposes, including as a hotel, a school, and a Benedictine monastery. The house remained unoccupied by 1909, and by 1943 it had been struck by a German bomb during World War II. The bomb damage left the building in ruins, making restoration unfeasible. In 1952, English Heritage took over the site and some minor rehabilitation efforts were made to allow the house to be open to the public. However, it's the latter Worsley construction, completed in 1772, that's most notable. The house was grand, with large, sweeping rooms, high ceilings, and an impressive facade. The house was designed to be a sprawling estate with extensive grounds surrounding it. Despite the damage over the years, these features are still capturing the imagination of visitors who can see the grandeur of what once stood in its prime. By the mid-1800s, the Worsley family had moved out, and the estate changed hands several times. Each new owner contributed to the shifting uses of the property, from a hotel to a school to a monastery, and by 1909 the house was completely unoccupied. In 1952, English Heritage took over the site, but efforts to restore it were limited. Over the decades, this once grand estate became an iconic symbol of decay, with ivy and moss overtaking the walls and floors. Today, the house is open to the public, but much of it remains in ruins. Despite some efforts at preservation, the heavy toll of time, vandalism, and nature's slow reclamation has left the house a shell of its former self. Its architectural remnants, or simply the eerie atmosphere of a once proud manor, overtaken by nature. Number 4. The Dunnington Mansion. The Dunnington Mansion, also known as Poplar Hill, is situated in Farmville, Virginia, and has a history that stretches back to the 1700s. Initially purchased by Richard Woodson in Prince Edward County, the property was originally a modest 4-room house that evolved into a larger estate over the following centuries. Woodson established Poplar Hill Plantation and began to build what would later become a notable residence. Following his death in 1774, the estate passed to his daughter Agnes and her husband Francis Watkins, who replaced the initial structure with a larger brick home by the late 18th century. Dunnington Mansion was originally designed in the Romanesque Revival style, with an elaborate interior that combined elements of Italian and Victorian architecture. The beauty of the house is evident from the foyer, featuring ornate woodwork and lavish brick fireplace near the front door. The interior is marked by high ceilings, intricately designed staircases, and richly decorated rooms, such as the formal dining room and study, both of which were hubs of entertainment. A highlight of the home is the Italian-style glass conservatory, though now in a state of decay. Even in its current dilapidated condition, the structure's beauty persists. Upstairs, archways and turret alcoves add to the home's charm, while the series of stairwells, once intended to separate servants from guests, now resemble a winding maze. The home was well maintained and inhabited for much of the 20th century, although detailed information about its occupants from 1960 to 98 remains scarce. In the 90s, there were plans to restore the mansion, possibly for events or guest accommodations, as it was situated in the scenic location of the Manor Golf Club. However, as the economy faltered, those plans were left abandoned due to lack of funding. Despite its state of abandonment, nature began to take its toll on the mansion. Floors have caved in, ceilings have fallen apart, and windows are now covered in layers of grime and cobwebs. Yet the mansion still remains haunting, albeit peaceful, a site where visitors can see how nature and decay have intertwined with the mansion's history. Number 3. The Carlton Island Villa. Carlton Island Villa, located on an island in upstate New York, has a fascinating and tragic history that intertwines with the rise and fall of its original owner, William O. Wyckoff. Wyckoff, having made his fortune in the typewriter business, sought a retreat from his busy life, choosing a spot on Carlton Island in 1894 to build his dream vacation home. Designed by architect William Miller, known for his work at Cornell University, the Carlton Island Villa was completed in 1895. The villa was a grand home, having 11 bedrooms and around 50 rooms in total, with stone foundations and wood frame upper floors. The property, spanning about 6.9 acres, had impressive waterfront views, with 3 distinct waterfronts. However, the villa's interior and structure have suffered over time due to neglect and deterioration. The design was impressive, but practical, with the aim to provide comfort in a serene setting. After the property was stripped in the 1940s, though, little remains to indicate the function of the various rooms, making the villa a shadow of its former self. By the 1930s, General Electric took ownership of the property with plans to transform it into a company retreat. However, World War II intervened and the property was left to decay. Despite the ambitions of General Electric, the villa remained unused and gradually fell into disrepair. By the late 1920s, though, the property had been largely abandoned already. Once grand rooms were left to the elements. But in 2022, a new chapter seemed possible when a developer purchased the villa with plans to restore it. However, the island's remote location and the high cost of restoring such a large property posed challenges. Today, the Carlton Island Villa stands as a decaying monument to a bygone era. The villa's isolation has contributed to that decay. While the property remains on the market for a modest price, few have been able to take on the expensive challenge of bringing it back to life. Number 2. La Manuela Hacienda. La Manuela Hacienda, once the personal escape of infamous Pablo Escobar, it's located on the shores of the Peñol Reservoir in the town of Guatape. It was built as a place of refuge from the pressures of Escobar's violent lifestyle. The estate spanned about 20 acres and included not only a mansion, but a tennis court, soccer field that doubled as a helipad, stables, a seaplane dock, and a guest house. La Manuela was designed with both luxury and security in mind. The mansion itself was equipped with all the modern amenities one might expect from a kingpin's hideout. The layout of the estate was deliberate. There was a special driveway for Escobar's motorcycles, adding to the sense of exclusivity, and of course a security force of 120 guards that ensured that only those permitted could access it. In 1993, La Manuela's story took a turn when it was met by Los Pepes, a group formed by those seeking revenge against Escobar. However, they were unable to fully raise the mansion thanks to the double-layered walls, which were designed as a blast barrier. Though Escobar had lived in the mansion for years, his downfall came shortly after this incident. Today, La Manuela is in a crumbling ruin. The once luxurious mansion has been overtaken by nature. The pool, once pristine, is now swampy and dilapidated. Visitors can wander through the estate, exploring the bombed-out mansion, the guard towers, and the bathroom where the bomb was planted. And in recent years, the area has also become a unique attraction for those seeking a more adventurous experience, with some people playing paintball amid the crumbling remains of this estate. Number 1. The Liu Family Mansion. The Liu Family Mansion sits in the rural outskirts of Taiwan, enveloped by an eerie atmosphere. Built in 1929 by the affluent businessman Liu Rongyu for his family, this 3-story Baroque-style mansion was once a symbol of luxury and wealth. Despite being a traditional design, the mansion also displayed elements that would have made it one of the most beautiful homes of its time in Taiwan. With large windows, a grand staircase, and elegant interior spaces, it was an ideal home for a family of means. But over time, nature would take its toll. The mansion's abandonment in the 1950s remains shrouded in speculation. While no one knows for sure why the Liu family left, it's widely believed that it had to do with both personal and political reasons. According to legend, one of the housemaids had an affair with Liu Rongyu. While their secret was discovered, it led to a dramatic and heartbreaking end. The maid, filled with shame, supposedly threw herself down the well, her spirit unable to find peace, and it's said to haunt the mansion to this day. The reality of the mansion's abandonment, however, could be more mundane. With the changing political landscapes following the end of the Japanese colonial rule and the shifting fortunes of the family, it's likely that he and his family simply moved for reasons like business or schooling. By the time the Liu family left, the mansion had begun to deteriorate. Decades of neglect allowed nature to overtake the building, turning it into a ruin. The vines creeping up the walls and the windows give it a jungle-like appearance, resembling the temples of Angkor in Cambodia. Its isolation, hidden behind dense forests and agricultural lands, only adds to its mystery. The area around the mansion is even home to a ghost-themed cafe where visitors can grab a bite before or after their eerie exploration. Yet one area remains strictly avoided, the well, where it's said the maid met her tragic end. According to legend, getting too close to the well will bring misfortune, a curse that's only fueled the mansion's haunted reputation. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members: